The other day, I got a package in the mail, which happens often enough. The contents of this package were interesting enough that I felt like I should discuss. And what we got here is 3 rolls of Ektar 1000. This expired in 1994, and you got to think color film. The expiration date's usually like a few years after it's produced, so it was likely produced in like 1990, 1991, or something to that effect. So this is, 30 plus years old film. And for those of you who didn't know, Ektar used to come in like a few different speeds, one of which of course was 1000. Now it's just Ektar 100. But regardless, I've got 3 rolls of really old Ektar 1000. And the reason I got this was because I've not shot it before, and I thought, well, at the very least, this will be like an interesting video talking about shooting higher speed expired color film, talk about what Ektar used to look like, and also just the look of the packaging alone is, it is next level. You can tell that there's a premium aesthetic to this between like this gold line and just that like really nice blue. Like there was a lot of time and effort put into this. And I feel like if I was to pick this up, I'm looking at it like I got a premium product. Even now looking at it, knowing that the condition it was stored in over the last 30 years is probably not great, and I'm probably not going to get much out of this, but regardless, I have 3 rolls of it now, so that's that. But this then led me to think of another topic I'd like to discuss with you now, which is buying expired film. And the market for that is interesting. Because a few years ago, you could not sell expired film. Like, nobody wanted it, really, because it was at this weird influx of film photography like, increasing in popularity, and there was enough supply of fresh film stocks from Kodak and Fuji that there wasn't really the need to search out these alternative films, these older expired films or whatever. And boy, oh boy, has that changed. Impressively so. Looking on the internet for expired film, you will be hard-pressed to find anything of good value. And I want to give a little buying guide of like things you might see and you should avoid. And then on top of that, things that like, oh, it's a pretty good deal. Like you should maybe get that or whatever. Just some guidelines because this is something that I've shot with a lot. I've bought a lot of. And I feel a little bit more educated in the ways of expired film. And just, any kind of garbage in particular, I feel like I'm just, in tune. I got that raccoon mindset, you know what I mean? There's a few different types of film. Obviously, you know this. For today's argument, we're going to kind of focus on like the main 3, which would be, in my mind, instant film, 35 millimeter, medium format. 110 is kind of a moot point because 110 it's a very small film. So any kind of aging and you're going to get some really weird distortions and weird effects. And sometimes that's kind of cool. I like shooting expired 110. That's almost exclusively what I shoot in 110. But also the cost of getting like an Orcus or a Tiger, I think is the other Lomography 110 film, isn't that much. So I'd probably recommend just going with newer 110 film. Large format film, I feel like it just makes more sense to get new as well. It's not really an area of expertise, so I'm going to kind of punt on that. So we'll just focus on instant, 35, and 120. Instant film, don't buy it. Just don't. Do yourself a solid. And if you're going to shoot 600, SX70, whatever, just buy fresh film stock. It's just, it ages so poorly, and that will show. And it will just ultimately be a waste of time and money. The larger pull-apart instant film, you can pretty much only buy that expired. So if that's your prerogative, by all means. But if you're watching this video because you just found like a Polaroid land camera and like, oh, maybe I should look into it, don't. Unless like you really feel the desire to look into some other resources or even check out the One Instant, I think it is. But don't do that. Like I've almost exclusively had bad luck with it, so I have a really hard time recommending that to people. And then on top of that, I just have much more fun with an Instax Mini. The expense of buying that FP whatever, the Fuji pull-apart film that's been refrigerated or cold stored for X amount of years and blah, 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 blah. It's just like, it's too much of a gamble. And for the results to be as varied as they are, it's not really even worth it, in my opinion. Your mileage may vary on that point, but if you want my opinion, juice ain't worth the squeeze. So medium format and 35 millimeter film, that's kind of what we're going to be left with in terms of getting expired film. And there's a few categories in that regard. Two things you want to avoid just straight off the bucket, like don't even mess with it. Kodachrome and Seattle Filmworks. Just don't touch them. Kodachrome, they don't make the developing for anymore. It's a KR14 chemical process, I think. There are some labs that can do it and get black and white back from it. But the expense going into that and the quality that you're going to get back, I just feel like is not really worth the cost. Unless you're going to do like a YouTube video like, oh, I shot this film that no one develops, and then try to develop it. Like, unless you're going to do that, I would just say it's probably best left alone. And then Seattle Filmworks, I do still plan on doing like a larger video on Seattle Filmworks because I think it's fascinating, but basically they had like their own internal system for like cataloging film from ECN2 to C41. And from my understanding, there's no way to differentiate between the two. And I think that they're both kind of called the same thing. So if you send it out to a lab and it's ECN2, you're going to fuck up a bunch of the development. It's going to be a whole issue, blah, blah, blah. It's just, again, not really worth it. And I don't think it's been produced since like the early 2000s. So it's not going to be good quality anyways. And it's just kind of another one of those gambles that in my mind is just not really even worth taking. So I would maybe avoid that. Those out of the way, let's go into the rest of it. Color positive film, Ektachromes, your Provias, your Sensias, all of the slide film that you're gonna be looking at. And by and large, I would say probably not worth the squeeze on that either. There's a few exceptions. I think like older Provia, older Sensia, older Velvia as well. Sometimes that's been stored a little bit more carefully, so that might be kind of worth it. But you also have to factor in the additional developing costs. An E6 kind of mitigates the value you'd be getting from buying it expired versus buying it new. You might as well buy it new, spend the extra money, and get higher quality images out of it. That being said, if you can find newer Provia and newer Velvia, newer things of that nature, then please by all means buy it because it ain't gonna be here long. Older Ektachrome, I feel like by and large doesn't really turn out too well. The newer stuff from like the 2000s might still have a little bit of life to live, but I think like the 1990s stuff and earlier is just gone. I've wasted money and time on that, believe me, and it's just not worth it. The other thing too is with today's market, people are like scrounging like their basements and their attics and they're finding this film. It's not been stored well, okay? Like it's not been stored well. And they're like, oh, well, people want this. And then they'll throw it up there and it's not going to do it. So avoid that. With that out of the way, well, let's get into the color negative film. And this is a little bit more interesting to me because I just got some. And this is going to be all the stuff that you can develop in C41. And that'll be kind of your more standard like Kodak color films, your Fuji color films, Ferrania Solaris film, the old Agfa Vista films. I would say if it is from the early 2000s, you're probably good to go. If it's from the 90s, you might be good to go. And if it's from anything earlier than that, you might want to pass on it, especially with the price of these things. Don't spend more on expired film than you would on newer film. I don't think that the aesthetic of expired film is enough to balance out the cost and the lack of quality that you're going to get. And you also have to bear in mind that your developing costs are going to be the same. So really, you're not getting a good deal. And that, I think, is another point I wanted to bring up. The only reason I used to shoot expired film is because it was, by and large, cheaper than shooting fresh film. It's not that way anymore. I got these 3 things of film for, I think it was like $40 or something, which is kind of insane. And if I wasn't doing it for a bit, then there's really no need for it. And this will lead to the next point of your film speed. Film speed, ASA, whatever, ISO, that is the film sensitivity to light. And this is also the film sensitivity to things like heat, temperature fluctuations, moisture, aging, what have you, any of the elemental effects that could occur by virtue of existing in life. And as somebody who recently moved out of a basement, those things, your environment, has a almost detrimental effect or in effect on the things that you own. And so living in a basement, living in an attic, whatever, like being stored in one of those two extremes, whatever biome you choose to live in, all of those things will affect what you own and subsequently your film. Film more so than anything else. So I think depending on where you're getting your film from, if it's like expired film from Florida, you might want to sit with like the 100 to 400 range of ASA. Stay away from the 1000, stay away from the 800 because it's going to get cooked. Any of the higher ISOs, it's going to be more sensitive. And it's the same with the color positive stuff. There's more layers of emulsion. There's more things that will show the effects of time. So that's something that I would like to make very blatantly clear. Color film from like the early 2000s, you can maybe get away with like an 800 speed film or even a 1600 film if you can find it, just for the sake of like being able to shoot 1600 Superia or 1600 Natura or even like a gold 1600 or something like that. That could be kind of fun if you can find it. But you just have to understand that that is going to be a huge risk, which would then lead to the final type of film, which is black and white film. And black and white film is, I think, bulletproof. Unless, of course, it's been sitting in the ocean for the last 20 years, it's usually completely fine. The only issues you're going to notice are going to be a little bit more grain and grit over time. But even the HP4 that I shot not too long ago, in a video that I will link here, that I think expired in 1970 something, and I shot it at a much slower speed than the 400, but it turned out beautifully. And like, I really like the aesthetic look to that. It is very gritty and it's very washed out, but it's still usable. Like, the images are still okay. And that's something that I think you would not be able to get away with a lot of color film, especially the older stuff, because the emulsions weren't as durable at that time. Takeaways from this. Expired film in 2024. Should you buy it? No. I would probably just say no. I certainly think that the juice is not worth the squeeze, which is unfortunate because, again, it's like been my bread and butter for many years, and it's something that I really enjoy. But I can't in good conscience recommend that to somebody because, one, there's such a diminishing supply of it that it's like the last breath of it is going to be so much more expensive. The value is so much higher by virtue of its diminishing supply, but the quality is diminishing almost as much as the supply. And that's where I think there's a very interesting relationship in a market that isn't really there with other brands or other things, necessarily speaking. And it's not something like a film camera that you can get fixed up. It's not something like a car that you can take to a mechanic. Film is the way it is. There's no way to like recook it, recan it, refresh it. It's just, that's the quality it's at. And it's from the moment of its production, it's in almost a constant state of decline. And over time, that has very negative effects overall on the film. And depending on whatever environment it is stored in, obviously that's going to have effects on it as well. Anyway, all that to be said, I did buy some film, so I'm going to shoot with it at some point, make a little video out of it. It'll be fun, I promise. But overall, I would just probably stay away from expired film. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, whatever, please comment them down below. Let me know what you think. What expired film have you shot with? What would you recommend? Am I completely off base? I don't think I am. Honestly, I've like scoured eBay lately and I've like kind of been reaffirmed of that conclusion I've come to. It's just not worth it. But I'm very curious to hear what you all think at home. So thank you very much for watching. Appreciate it as always. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, and I will catch you on the next one.